Before we get started writing code, let's make a topic branch as usual. Get checkout -b. Let's call it updating users. There are other topics in this lesson, but this is our first one. And it's a nice pithy name for the branch. So to get started with updating users, let's take a look at our new page for users, because the update page will be very similar. Go new users. This is, remember, a form for @user, and then there are all these divs with labels and text fields or labels and password fields. So let's just take a look at this. This is our sign up page, and let me get rid of these guys here. To edit a user, we want something pretty much like this, only instead of a sign up, it's going to be edit, and then we'll maybe have an update button down here. In fact, let's take a look at a mock-up of what we might want it to look like. So here's the mock-up. We've got name, email, password, confirmation, and then an update button. And then remember that we're using Gravatars for the images, so we'd like to have a link to the Gravatar edit page as well. So as you might imagine, we're going to be able to reuse a lot of the same ideas for this edit user page that we used on the registration page, the sign up page. So as usual, let's get started with some tests. I'm going to go to TextMate, and let's look at the users controller spec. Here it is. And so what we're going to be doing is something very similar to the get new and the post create, except instead of get new, it's going to be get edit, and instead of post create, it's going to be put update. So let's take a look, just as a reminder, of the routes. Here are the routes. Get/users, get/user/1, get/user/new. We're going to be working with get/user/1/edit. So that's going to be in here. Let's do get edit. Get edit. And in here, we're going to need a before each block. What should go in the before each block? We certainly are going to want to have users signed in when they edit their information. So let's look at, let's just make an @user. @user equals the factory user. And let's sign that user in. Test sign in @user. Now if we look up here at the way we did new, we just did get new, and the response should be success, and it should have the right title. So let's do those two things. So it should be successful. And what we want to do is get the edit page, or actually get the edit action. And unlike with new, we actually have to give it a user ID. So you can see over here that we have to say get, it's going to be /user/1/edit. So we need to know the user. And as usual with Rails, we don't actually have to say user.id. We can just say ID is @user, which is really nice, very compact. And now we want to say the response should be success. So this will not work yet. Probably, actually, it might work. Let's see. Do we have a template? No, we don't. And we also want it should have the right title. So it should have selector title, and the content will say edit user. So let's get that to pass. Show new create and say def edit, and we're going to say @title equals edit user. So we don't have a template yet. We need to make that. So let's do make the view, and let's just take a look at users. Now new.html.erb is almost exactly the same. In fact, we can refactor some of this into a partial at some point. So let's just copy a bunch of this stuff, and we're going to we'll modify it a little bit. Let's add a new page edit.html.erb. It's very tempting to use a partial for everything inside here, but experience shows that sometimes you want to do things slightly differently on new and edit, so it's actually not too bad to just have them be copied and pasted like this. So let's say edit user here. let's take a look at which things we need to change. We certainly want to change sign up to update. And for now, that may be it. Let's take a look at this and see how green or red we are. Yeah, we're red. Let's take a look. I know why we're red, but it's a good idea to take a look at Autotest. Undefined method model name for nil class, or yeah, for nil class. So the problem here is that we don't have an @user in here. So because you see in new we have @user equals user.new, but of course here we have a user. There's an existing user. We're editing a user, and so what we should do is do user.find and then do params of ID. So this is going to find the user in the database based on the ID. Let's see if this gets us to green. And there we go. Look at that. So let's take a look at the actual page. You just sign in. Let's do there we go. And so now we want to go to /users/1/edit. And there we go. Look at that. It actually works. I mean, of course, it doesn't work, but the page renders and everything. And it even pre-populates the name and email fields with the name and email of the user. Now, you may recall from the mock-up that we don't just want this form, we actually also want a link to the Gravatar. So let's do that too. Let's write a test for the presence of a Gravatar link. So in order to do this, you have to know the particular URL that Gravatar uses for editing the Gravatars. And you can do that by going to gravatar.com and clicking around, but I'm just going to tell you what it is. It's actually kind of hard to guess. So let's say it should have a link to change the Gravatar. And we're going to get edit ID @user as usual. And then let's say response should have a link. So let's say it should have selector, and we're going to say a for an anchor tag. Remember, we can give it a hash that has the href. It's the URL. And so the URL, it turns out to be it's this gravatar.com/emails. And the content should be, and let's just have the word change. So let's just make a div here at the bottom. And let's make remember we have a helper to display the Gravatar for a user, which is just Gravatar for, and now we have @user. And let's just make a hard-coded link. href equals, and then it's the URL, so let's just do it. Well, let's just type it in again. This will debug our typing. Let's take a look at this. And there we go. So everything is passing, and we should in fact have a Gravatar. And we can even visit it. Let's take a look. Click on change. Log in. And this is the page. You can see it actually is gravatar.com/emails, but then with en for the language at the front. But this the URL in the test works cross-language. So this is the page to manage Gravatars. You may have noticed actually that it opened in the same browser window. So there's actually a nice trick to get it to open in a new tab. So this is actually not valid HTML, but it works in every browser I've ever seen. Target equals blank, _ blank. So let's reload the page, and if you click on this, now it opens in a new tab. So that's a nice little detail. So now that we've got this page working, I want to refactor it right away. This is just so much overlap, it's really ridiculous. Let's make a partial with all this stuff in here. You can see this stuff is identical. In fact, the shared error messages is the same too. The f.submit part is different. It's update here, and it's sign up over here, but everything in here is the same. So I want to factor this into a partial. And let's call it fields _ fields .html.erb. Let's do this. So now in here, what we want to do is replace this with just render fields. And the same thing in the user, or the new user partial, or new user page. We're going to render this partial. Now we've got some tests for the HTML. Remember, we have an integration test for signing up. So if we broke anything, then something should break right now. In fact, let's take a look at it. I have a suspicion. Yeah, tons of things broke. And the reason tons of things broke is that if you look at this fields partial, there's this f, this form variable. But what is this form variable? It's not defined inside the partial. It's defined inside here, where there's an f in as a block variable. So what we need to do in this case is pass that variable to the partial. One of the nice things about this refactoring exercise is we get to see how to do this. It's a very useful exercise. The way to do it is to pass a symbol that is the same as the variable. So in this case, just :f for the form variable, and then you want to pass the actual variable. So the thing on the left is f, the symbol, and the thing on the right is f, the actual variable. And so let's save that, and actually we need to do it here too. Now let's see how we are. Should be green again. Okay, and just to emphasize how this works, this f here is the name of the variable in the partial. So we could call this foobar, and we could call this foobar, and we could change all the f's. Here's my find and replace. I'm replacing f dot with foobar dot, so you can see how that worked. And now let's just double check to see we're still green. Yeah, so this variable, this whatever is here, is arbitrary. It's just the name of the variable inside the partial. But of course, it's convenient to use the same letter, just for consistency. Good. And just triple check. I'm paranoid about these kinds of changes. Good. We are looking very green. Now, before moving on, I want to add a link to the site layout. You'll notice that we had to type in the actual URL of the edit page. So let's change that. Where it's /user/1/edit. And what we want is to change these links. We want to add a settings link to the top right part here. So remember where that is. That's our navigation. So it's in layouts, header, and it's under in this these nav tags. So let's say if signed in, link to profile, which is linking to the current user, and we also want to link to settings. So see if you can figure out what the URL is going to be here. Let's take a look here. The URL for the user's edit page has a named route. It's edit user path and then the ID. So let's take a look at that. It's going to be edit user path. And then remember, we can pass the whole user, not just the user ID. So this ought to work. Let's take a look at that. Yeah, so that worked. And this is the kind of thing that we really ought to put in the layout links spec. So let's take a look at this. Spec, requests. Let's close down some of these guys. So layout links. And where do we have the profile link? Here it is. Should have a profile link. Oh, when signed in, this is good. So it also should have a settings link. So let's just visit the root path. href, you can guess from analogy with the user path at user here, it's going to be edit user path at user. And then content is settings. And let's comment this out. Remember how to do that, just put a hash sign right in there. And let's lose focus, and we should be red. Good. Remember, it saves when I lose focus, and so let's do that again. The reason I did lose focus there was because both files had been modified, and I just wanted to save them both at the same time. So there we go. Now we're green again. We can verify that we've got a working settings link. I mean, we've got a test for it, but it's always nice to see. Let's click on the home page and click on settings, and there we go. And now we have a form that renders. All we need to do is get this update button to do the right thing. Let's click on it, as we always do. Yeah, the action update could not be found for user's controller, and that's because we don't have an update method here in the user's controller. So as usual, we're going to write our test first, but there's one subtlety I want to discuss, and it's something you may even have thought of already. If you go back to this page, and if you remember the routes for the user's resource, you might wonder how we know to be routed to the right place. So here are the user routes, and you can see that if you put to /user/1, it goes to the update action. That's what the default Rails router does in this context. But remember that browsers can't issue anything but GET and POST requests. So how is this working? How does it issue a PUT request? Well, we can find out by looking at the source of this page. Just open up the source. If we go down to the form tag, right down here, we see that it says method equals post right here. Remember, that's the only thing you can do. Well, you can actually do a get in a form as well, but browsers can only do gets and posts. But if you look over here, if you scroll over, there's another input tag. It's a hidden tag, so it doesn't show up. And it says name equals method, which is just something Rails uses internally, and value equals put. So this is how Rails fakes a put request in a browser, is with this hidden form field. But this really only deepens the mystery, because if you recall the actual code, let's look at the code for the edit page versus the new page. So form for @user, form for @user. It's exactly the same. So how does it know to issue a post request in the case of the new user and a put request in the case of editing user? And the answer is that it's possible to tell from the @user variable whether this is a new user or a user that has already been created. So let's take a look at that in the console. So I've got a console session here. Let's do user.first. This is the first user. Now let's do user.first.new_record ? And that's false because that user already exists. But what if we had a new user? User.new. That is true. So what Rails is doing is, in this context, @user is not a new record, so it knows to put in that special put line, whereas here, @user is a new user. You can recall from the user's controller that this is just @user equals user.new. So, by the way, we saw this once before in the context of the user model. When we made this salt, we said if new record. And so what we've got here is like user, effectively under the hood, we've got user equals, say, user.new. We're doing user.new_record. But here in this method, in the encrypt password method, because it's inside the class, we don't have to put the object. So we could do self.newRecord, but we don't have to. And so somewhere in the Rails internals, it's calling new record on this @user variable and putting the put in if necessary. So at this point, we're ready to do the actual edit functionality. Let's get rid of these views. We don't need them right now. We don't need this either. But we do need something in the user's controller. So what we're going to have, in analogy with the new create pairing, we're going to have edit update. So let's make some tests for that for the update action. It's always a good idea to get a start by looking at what we've done before. We've got post create here, and we have failure and success mode. So let's follow that basic pattern and say describe put update. And then let's put in another describe block here. Describe failure. And so inside this block, let's have a before each block. Before each, let's have a user. @user equals factory user. And then let's sign it in. And actually, this before each block should be in the outer block. So this is actually for both the failure and success. So let's move this over one. And what we want in describe failure is actually the attributes hash, so like what we have here. In the case of post create failure, we have an attributes hash. So let's put in an attributes hash. And in fact, we can just use the same one that we had up here in the post create. Let's just copy this hash with all blank attributes. Let's take a look at this. All right, and now let's just do some of the failure modes. So what can happen? So let's say it should re-render the edit page, or I guess it should render the edit page. This is what happens if you put update, if you click on that button. If you click on this button, what it should do is just re-render the same page. The edit page. And let's say, how are we going to do this? Well, let's take a look up here. We've got, should render the new page here, post create, and then the user with the attributes. So this should be the same thing, except instead of post create, it should be put update and user attributes. And let's say the response should render template edit. So while that's failing, let's actually, will that, oh no, so we don't even have an update. Let's do it. Def update. And now let's just render edit. This is the core of TDD, just one thing at a time. Huh, why did that work? Oh, you know, why didn't that work? Oh, it didn't work because we need an @user, don't we? Let's do that. In fact, let's just take a look at why it didn't work. I could guess why it didn't work, but... Oh, it says no route matches that, so that isn't the problem. Let's take a look at this. Oh, we don't have the user. So what's going on here is that we worked too much in analogy with the post version. So it was post, remember up here, post create, and then the user hash, which is the attributes, this guy. But remember that for editing, we actually need to know the ID of the user. So ID is @user. There we go. This might be green. No, still red. Right, so now it's the problem that I thought it was originally, that we don't have an @user. You can see it says undefined method model name for no class. So let's say @user. Actually, it's just the same thing here. Now we should be green. Good. And now let's make sure we have the right title. I'm just going to copy this here. And now we're going to say response dot should have selector title, and what's the title? Say the title is, remember the content is edit user. So that should be red, and we need to put an @title in here, which is the same one here. And that's pretty much all that happens on failure. So let's look at success. Now before each, we actually need some valid data, and I'd like to have it be different so that we can verify that the update actually went through. So let's look at an attributes hash. Before each, make @attr equals, and now let's have the name be some new name. Just literally have it be new name. Remember, right now it's example user if you go to the factories. I'm sorry, no, it's actually me. It's actually my name. But in any case, new name is the right choice for a new name. And the email is well, currently it's well. Let's just do stuff we know is new. User@example.org is new, and let's see if what else do we want? Oh, let's change the password. Instead of foobar, it's going to be barbaz. And password confirmation is the same. All right, so now what should happen if it fails in terms of the controller? I'm sorry, what should happen if it succeeds? This is if it's actually success. Well, we should certainly change the user's attributes. Like, that's the most important thing. If you update the user's attributes, it should actually do the change. So let's write that. It should change the user's attributes. So what are we going to do? We're going to put update ID at user is attributes. And now remember, we had this assigns idea. Assigns, if I can spell it, there it is. So assigns of :user reaches into the controller and pulls out the variable at user. So we've got an at user here. And so what that means is that if we go down here and let's just bind it to a local variable, user equals assigns of user. And so now what we want to make sure of is that the name of the new user in the database, or like the current user, the new attributes of at user in the database should be whatever we have here. So in other words, it's kind of confusing because there are two at users. This at user is the user in the database, this at user, and we're going to want to save that user's attributes. So that at user in the controller is this user. This at user here is the factory user from up here. But the point is that we definitely want them to agree. And in order to get this to work, since we should have changed the attributes of at user, we actually need to reload the user in the database, or just basically pull out the information from the test database in this case. So let's do at user.reload. And now we want, let's just test the name and the email. At user.name.should equal user.name. So these should agree. And the same thing for at user.email.should equal user.email. And let's get the password too. At user.password. Actually, let's see if the encrypted passwords match. Now, you may recall the way to do this, which is to update attributes. There's an update attributes method in ActiveRecord that will actually allow us to update the attributes of this at user with the params of user. In the create action, params of user right here is the right hash to initialize a new user. In this case, it's also the right hash to update the attributes of the user. So let's do this. At user.update attributes of params user. So let's do that. And remember, update attributes returns true if the update succeeds and false otherwise. So we can say if, this is just like user.save. If at user.update attributes, then it worked. Else, it failed, and we're going to do the things that we do when it fails. And let's take a look at this. This might be green. Nope, it's still red. Okay, so it's actually doing the update, but it's still complaining that there's no template. So we do have to put in the next test to get this to pass. So what do we actually want to do? If the updated attributes succeeds, we should redirect somewhere. So a reasonable place to redirect is just back to the user's profile. And so remember, we can do that with redirect to at user, just like up here. We will have a flash message, by the way. That's going to be one final thing. So this is pretty much complete now. You can see how compact this code is. Now we're green. So let's take a look at this. Good. Let's just double check the whole test suite. Great. So this works, and we actually, I mean, this is amazing that all of these attributes actually match. Let's see if we needed that at user.reload. I'm not 100% sure we needed it. So let's comment it out and see if, yeah, so we do need it. The at user.reload pulls the values out of the database, because what happens here is we set at user equal to the factory user, and so its name and email and password are still these defaults. So now that we're green, there's one more thing I want to do. I want to say it should have a flash message. And as before, it's always good to refer to what we've done before. Up here, we have post create user is add attributes, and then flash success should, and then we've got this the equal tilde for regular expression matching. So let's do that here. Put update. Now I'm going to say the flash, well, instead of flash error, this is flash success. Actually, I think it was flash success up here too. Yeah, it was flash success. So okay, so it's the same thing. Dot should match, and let's just say that it should say something about being updated. So this should be red. We can just say, let's just copy this. It's going to be the same idea. Redirectory at user, flash success, and let's just say profile updated. And I guess we're using periods in our flash notices. Well, punctuation, so exclamation point here and a period there. So we're green. This is excellent. And this is now a working updater. So let's just take a look at it. Let's actually do it. Rails tutorial, let's say, let's just say Michael Hartle here, and password. You don't have to change your password, of course. I just typed in my same password. And there we go. Look at that. Profile is updated. And instead of Rails tutorial, now it says Michael Hartle.